There's a story coming out today which is demonstrating Russia's involvement in the US elections. And everything seems to be pointing to a link between the Kremlin and a specific group of extreme far right activists. Uh, it's a concern that intertwines propaganda, disinformation, domestic politics. It's not the first time we've heard of it. And in fact, there's now the stories in the Financial Times today about quite the opposite, about a link between Russia and the far left, specifically the BSW party, organized by Sarah Wagenknecht, and and people who are sympathetic to her, people who oppose, and the tropes are very similar. People who oppose wokeism, people who oppose the cancel culture ideology, is attracting members of the CDU. The Financial Times talks about a political force of the margins, and opposing what it calls the warmongering of the West, particularly people like Klaus Ernst. But that's Germany. That's Europe. In America, it's the right wing who are doing this. And the latest indictments highlight how Russia, through its state-controlled media RT, orchestrated covert funding of right-wing influencers in a bid to shape narratives that align with Moscow's interests. And these indictments reveal the depth of Russian attempts to exploit US free speech and media ecosystems to create divisions and influence public opinion, particularly regarding the war in Ukraine, immigration, economic issues like inflation. I remember being interviewed on RT as the Ukraine war was taking off, and I have a number of friends who moved to front programs on RT in the past, and one of them contacted me and asked me if I would be on his show, and I agreed. And what happens on these shows is when you're sitting there waiting for your interview, and there's very little preparation. I quite enjoy the adrenaline rush, actually, but when you're sitting there, you're listening to the program as it's going out. There's generally a sort of 2-minute lag, and so you're listening to the previous piece. And the previous piece that I was listening to on this occasion was complete propaganda and misinformation. So I'm afraid when I got to my bit, I referenced the propaganda and the misinformation. I would never be had back on again, of course. But I knew that there wasn't enough space to completely censor me, particularly if I kept repeating the concept with different words and referred to it each time that I answered the question that had been placed, as long as I answered the question, which I did. And it's rather like my trope of Putin's death. Do I believe it? I don't know. Do I think it's an entertaining trope? Absolutely. And do I think it's a possibility? Absolutely. But do I believe it? Do I care? Not particularly. Putin has long since abandoned humanity, and therefore it doesn't matter to me whether he's alive or dead. He is like Schrodinger's cat, both alive and dead in the fridge. You open the fridge, eventually you discover he could be in Mongolia, that could be a doppelganger. That could well be the reason why he feels so comfortable going to Mongolia. Because if somebody does try to arrest him, all he has to do is hold up his passport and say, actually, I'm not really Putin. And then and then there'll be so much nonsense. The real Putin is back on the plane. Or whatever he wants to say. Take one for the team. It's the propaganda web that Russia has been extending exceeds all expectations, really. It extends through entities like Tenet Media, a Tennessee-based company accused now of funneling $10 million dollars from RT to well-known right-wing commentators such as Dave Rubin, Tim Pool, Benny Johnson, all allegedly paid to push favourable Russian narrative. They claim ignorance of the scheme. And while these influencers produce varied content, much of it echoes themes beneficial to Russia, most notably weakening the US support for Ukraine and sowing domestic discord. Not so difficult to do. And the indictment today underlines several key points about Russian influence operations in the US. First, the Kremlin seeks to exploit the country's openness and democratic freedoms, which includes leveraging right-wing media and influencers. And these campaigns often target polarizing topics that resonate with certain voter bases, particularly in right-wing circles, amplifying narratives that divide Americans on issues like immigration and national security. We see the same thing here. By funding such efforts covertly, Russia's goals extend beyond merely supporting specific political candidates, aiming instead to destabilize the US democracy itself. A destabilized democracy cannot support Zelensky. Second, the tactics employed by Russia are increasingly sophisticated. The use of shell companies, fake personas, covert funding streams demonstrates a shift from the cruder efforts seen before 2016 by creating fictional investors like Eduard Grigorian, some sort of non-existent Armenian, and using shell companies to fund money. Russia was able to disguise its hand in these operations, tricking influencers and by extension their audiences. The Justice Department's seizure of 32 websites linked to Russian disinformation underscores how Russia is expanding its digital footprint, using tools like AI and social media platforms to spread propaganda without raising immediate suspicion. From a broader perspective, this indictment also raises questions about the responsibility of US media influencers. While Rubin, Poole and Johnson claim they were victims in this scheme, their involvement brings up issues regarding due diligence and ethical responsibility in the content creation space. These influencers command significant following and shape public discourse, yet their willingness to engage with unknown funding sources to promote content without verifying its origins makes them vulnerable to manipulation. Just as if they're sending birthday greetings to people that they don't know, reading from a script for cameo. You know, I do Cameo, by the way, and when people send me requests, I give them a genuine greeting. I don't read from the script. If I can avoid it, I don't read from the script. So I don't find myself in a situation like, for example, Mr. Farage, where I'm reading something that actually is designed to make me look ridiculous, or designed to make me look as if I support something that I don't. I'm quite careful. Of course, you know, I mean, it's just me, so I could easily find myself in a mess with that. But imagine a more targeted approach. Critically, the role of right-wing media in this disinformation web is central to understanding the broader dynamic. Russia's targeting of this particular form of media is no accident. Right-wing outlets often focus on issues like nationalism, sovereignty, skepticism of mainstream narratives, topics that align really well with the Russian strategic objective of undermining the mainstream media focus and support for Ukraine. By amplifying these themes, Russia not only reinforces its geopolitical goals, such as justifying its invasion of Ukraine, but also drives wedges between different segments of the US electorate. And the intertwining of Russian propaganda and domestic media ecosystems presents a multifaceted challenge. And don't for one minute think that Russia has one agendum here. It doesn't. It has multiple agenda, which is why it's so happy to be bedfellows with the far left in Germany, the far right in America. It underscores the vulnerability of US democracy, of German democracy to foreign manipulation through seemingly innocuous means. In the US, by embracing YouTube videos and social media posts. On the other hand, it also raises concerns about the accountability of media figures who, knowingly or unknowingly, become vehicles of foreign influence. The ability of foreign powers to exploit domestic polarization, to magnify divisions, to subtly shift public opinion through disinformation underscores the need for greater transparency and vigilance in the media landscape. And that's not the vigilance necessarily of the people doing the creation, that's also the vigilance of you. So while the US government's response, indictments, website seizures, sanctions, is a step perhaps in the right direction, perhaps not. Perhaps it's like the immigration problem in the Channel. Perhaps it's attacking the victims rather than the smugglers and the traffickers. Combating Russian influence requires a much more comprehensive and focused approach. This includes not only holding foreign actors accountable, but also encouraging media literacy among the public, reinforcing safeguards in the media and tech sectors. Russia's influence tactics have evolved, and so too must the strategies to counter them. Without greater scrutiny and stronger defences, the US remains vulnerable to foreign manipulation. And again, that foreign manipulation, that manipulation was in evidence when I was working in Russia and doing the occasional interview on Russian television, and I found my words were dubbed. That my speech was modified, and I wasn't the only person. John Curtis, the professor, Sir John Curtis, the psophologist, the fellow who's wheeled out at election time from Strathclyde University, he was on the same programme, and I had taken the decision long ago to film all my interviews myself, to record them on my mobile phone, so that because I was suspicious, and on this occasion I caught them. They didn't expect that I would see the program. They didn't expect that I would understand what was being said, and what was being said by me was completely different to the sort of things I would have said, even in Russian. And I flagged it up, and I'd been put in touch with this production company, NTV, by one of my former students, and I'd done a series of lectures in the School of Journalism or something. I can't remember what it was called now. I think it was the School of Journalism. I'd done a series of lectures about the ethics of journalism, and this person, who was then working at the channel, got in touch with me and asked me if I would do some interviews, and I did. They're very happy to do so. So I contacted him, and he put me in touch with the company, and I went along to the recording studio, and I was due to see the woman who fronted the program, and I was left in a coffee in a coffee shop in a cafe, paying for my own coffee, which was detestable, and for about 2 or 3 hours, until some runner came along and said, "Oh, she can't see you, she's too busy." Or she's gone home or something. And so it was clear that level of disinformation was already there. And that was back in 2016, 2017, something like that, maybe 2018. It was already there. I think the Crimea had already been invaded. I don't remember. But Russia has used many tricks. If it's got the ability to dub fake words, and it was also at the same time dubbing and censoring LGBTQ plus references in major Hollywood films by that stage. And I did an article about that too. So I was aware of what was happening. I just didn't expect to be part of the story. And we have to look in many different ways at the ways in which Russia has become extremely accomplished at putting forward its opinions, or rather of just distorting what is there. Because the distortions of what I said in the interviews weren't important. This is the irony of it. It was almost as if they were just testing out the systems. And that was why it was so important. And the BBC eventually did a little report about the story, because the Russian media wasn't interested in taking this forward or delivering an appropriate apology that I felt was suitable. So I took the story to the BBC. And the BBC did a quite interesting article about it in a thing called BBC Monitoring, I think. And also referenced the John Curtis story, for which there wasn't evidence. In my case, there was evidence, because I had the original and I had what was broadcast, which has now been removed, which doesn't surprise me at all. But this is a country, or this is a power, the Kremlin is a power that has amassed significant sophistication using the tools that exist, which is AI, which is the basic tools of dubbing, and developing and building on this with extraordinarily good linguists and a very tight control on the chaos that is spreading. And beyond no doubt, the St. Petersburg, we call them troll farms. In Russia, they call them troll factories, are very active and very engaged with social media and YouTube and the platforms of discord, be in no doubt. And indeed, Tucker Carlson, I'm not so sure he wasn't duped as well. He would be a very good target, I think, from a Russian perspective. This targeting of specific right-wing actors across America, and I would suggest across the UK, is a policy, not specifically to knowingly spread the Russian narrative, but to knowingly spread discord. From discord and chaos, Russia has leverage. And that is the idea. That is the idea. And it was clear back in the day when I was in Moscow. It doesn't matter what the content is, as long as there is chaos